Hey, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome to Beekeeping for Newbies. Thank you so very much for taking the time to listen. I do appreciate you. And as always, feel free to reach out, Jeff at beekeepingfornewbies.com. Well, folks, today we have got the Bee Buzz episode 18. There is so much that we're going to talk about today. This is just, there's a ton of information in here. I think it's a combination of notes that I've had for a while that are just things I wanted to go over. There are things that were, of course, in the Bee Buzz section of the Discord room that I extracted all of those notes and questions. Then this other thing I've been doing, and I've mentioned this, I think, in a previous episode, but my earlier podcast audio quality was trash. It was so bad. I had no idea just how bad it was. I had gone back to look for something and started playing things and was dealing with all the audio, and I'm like, oh my God, I got to redo everything. So I'm in the process of going back and literally like refreshing and updating and cleaning up, and just, it's such a disaster. So again, I want to thank all of you who have hung out and made it through the years and suffered through that early audio disaster. But in the process of doing that, I've actually listened to several episodes. So there's a couple of notes that I wanted to share about some things that were in there that either didn't happen or maybe where I misspoke, and I wanted to kind of clarify. And then we just have a couple of small updates. I'm not going to go crazy with a whole bunch of what am I doing, where am I? It's kind of the same old stuff. Still fighting the respiratory infection, blah, 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 blah. Okay, I think the most interesting thing that I've kind of got going on now is something that my podcast host has offered for a while. And I just was kind of like, I just wasn't really feeling it. It was a exclusive content section, and they email you like once every month or two, and they say, hey, you can add exclusive content at no charge and blah, 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 and all this kind of stuff. And all that I see when I hear exclusive content, that means great. You're asking for money. You want people to start paying for stuff. And I don't know. I kind of almost look at it as like a software developer or somebody who did something really cool. Like, you just want people to use it. You want people to enjoy it. You want people to consume it. That's kind of the way I've always looked at the podcast. I've always just looked at it as I want to put it out there for all of you to enjoy. Hopefully you get some benefit out of it. Hopefully you find some value in it. Hopefully you save a ton of money and don't waste a lot of money like I did in my early years. That's my goal. The reality of it right now, though, is I actually wake up every day and this is all I'm doing every day. Like, I get up in the morning, I'm doing things with podcast, audio editing, monitoring the Discord room, answering questions, answering emails. And it's at a point where I'm like, wow, this is so amazing that I'm waking up and I'm doing bee stuff every day, all day. And then, of course, the beginning of the month rolls around and I'm like, oh, I got to pay the mortgage. I got to do that, So there has to be a balancing act between how much I do because it's just fun and I'm passionate about it, and where I have to kind of cut myself off and say, okay, if I'm going to go beyond this point, there's going to have to be some other thing involved from a monetary standpoint. What I'm going to do with this exclusive content is, as of now, just starting out early on, what you're going to have via the podcast is going to be every episode that has been done and that is released starting, from this point forward, it's going to be the same. So you'll have a regular podcast that comes out through your regular distribution method, and then you'll have it come through in a exclusive content. They will be the same minus commercials. So if you are a exclusive content subscriber, you're going to have no commercials. That's kind of step one. Now, I think there's like a monthly option. There's a yearly option. To kind of entice anybody who's interested in going for the yearly option, if you do that, I'm going to lock you in for a couple of calls. Now, I'm generically saying 2 phone calls a year, 15 minutes per call. I'm just doing that to provide some kind of a framework or like a baseline for us to work from. If it ends up being 4 or 5 calls, I'm not going to try to bill you for it. If it ends up being 30 or 40 minutes, I'm not going to try and ask you for money. It's just, I want to put something in place to give us some limitations. So in case anything gets out of hand, I can be like, hey, you gotta settle down here. We gotta pull the reins a little bit here. And in addition to that, at some point in time, I will probably roll out some kind of actual exclusive content. There may be portions of interviews that I might put aside. There might be something where, like, for example, whenever I start out every day, I have a bit of a pre-recording ritual So you can, like where I sing Jimmy Buffett, Whitney Houston, Led Zeppelin, and many more of your musical favorites. But anyway, there might be like outtakes and special interviews, or I don't know. There might be something more coming down the road. But full transparency, early on, you're getting 100% commercial free. And like I said, if you go for the annual deal, you'll get the couple of one-on-ones, 2, 3, 4, whatever. I don't care. But I want you to have somebody you can talk to, because there's so many times where something comes up and you're just like, oh crap, what do I do? And one thing I would ask with that, try to give me like a heads up though, because I've had people that have tried to get a hold of me. Like I'm out. I'm not even anywhere near a computer, a laptop, a B yard. And someone messages like, oh my God, I'm in the hive right now. Can you help? And I don't see it till like 6 hours later. So if there is something going on, let's try to communicate a little bit with that one. So that's one big thing I have going on there. I think that that's useful because I absolutely cannot stand commercials. I'm 100% willing to pay to not have commercials. So anyway, that's step one. We'll try to phase some other things in there. And hey, I'm open to your guys' suggestions. If you're like, hey man, there's some really cool things that I'm not seeing that I'd love to see, let me know. Let's see what we can bring in. We're trying to get great interviews. We're trying to get people who are super knowledgeable to share some of their experience and knowledge. All for the suggestions though. Another thing I'm working on is setting up a virtual mentorship. And this is the same kind of a thing, but it's a bit more formalized. I'm not sure exactly how to structure this, but I want it to be in a way where somebody can have access to help, whether it's me linking them up with somebody else who's in our Discord, whether it's me being involved, me doing it. I don't know the best way to structure everything just yet, but there are way too many people who email and they're like, hey man, I really need some help here. I don't know how to do X, Y, and Z. I can't find a mentor here. There's nobody who's willing to help me. I'm not blaming you. I'm not upset with you at all. I mean, you're just the person in the situation, but I want to find a way to help you. I want to find a way to get you the help that you need so that you can be successful. So as I mentioned earlier, I have been reviewing a lot of the episodes, and I wanted to go back and just hit on a couple of things that I replayed, and I was like, not sure if I really like that. So I want to give you a couple of updates. First thing is I have to apologize to Kimberly. If I remember correctly, I think she was from Northern Virginia, maybe. Well, I'm not going to give away the exact area. I don't want her thinking anybody's going to come knock on her door or something, but she was having an issue. I think it was last season or the one before even, with foul brood. And I think this might have even been like 2022. But she had an issue with foul brood, trying to work through it, made some suggestions, ended up having to burn a bunch of gear. We were going to have her on. And there was an episode where I was like, hey, we're going to have Kimberly on next episode and have her share her experience with us, because it's a really, really important thing. It's something that everybody kind of needs to be able to recognize, understand how to address it and attack it when you're confronted with foul brood of, either type. And that next episode rolled around. And I do remember we had some scheduling issues at that time. And I mentioned in the next episode, hey, we couldn't get coordinated, but we'll have her on the next episode. And then it completely dropped off. Like there's nothing there. So Kimberly, I am so very sorry. This was not intentional at all. I apologize. That's all I got. Sorry about that. So the next thing I have in episode 17, there was one, honey, honey, and more honey. I commented in this episode that a good time to extract is after I see a drop in hive activity. So I wanted to say that this is not always best for everyone. I do this so that I have a gauge as to how much, honey I expect to have for the entire summer. Like, so what I'm going to have for me, what I'm going to leave for them. If you're in an area where you have a steady flow all summer, or maybe you are going to take bees that are in your yard and you're going to put them on a pollination contract, or maybe you're taking them off of a pollination contract. There's lots of scenarios where you may just pull honey at any given time. So if the super is full and the honey is capped, that's the big asterisk there. You want that honey to be capped. So if supers are full, honey is capped, by all means, feel free to take them off when you need them or when you want them. I will always say, please make sure you are leaving something behind for the bees, because if you take everything that they have nothing, and that ultimately in some way will likely lead to some dead bees. I also said in that episode not to extract honey from any supers that were on when you were treating for Varroa. Now, of course, my mindset, what I'm thinking about is you have honey on there that you're planning to sell or give to somebody else. Now, technically you can treat with oxalic acid while the supers are on. But I don't think I clearly explained that as an option. And I think it's important to look at the documentation and everything that is provided by whatever solution that you're going to use. Off the top of my head, oxalic acid in the vapor form is fine with honey supers. I do not know for the pads, like the 30-day pads. I honestly don't remember. I don't use those, but I probably, if I was really squared away, I would have looked that up ahead of time and had that answer for you. So I'm going to make a little note and come back to that one. But just make sure that whatever you choose, check the documentation on it. So whether you're using Apivar, Thymol, Apigard, there's a lot of different solutions that are out there. Just make sure you're checking whatever it says on there. You can treat with honey supers on, with OA vapor. I do not. I'm not worried about anything. I just don't do it. I think I had also mentioned in that episode about treating like at 2 times a year or 1 time a year or at certain times a year. I'm going to dig a little bit deeper into Varroa treatment as tied to a question later on today. I used to do things a little bit differently than I do today, and I'll explain that when we get to that point. All right, the first thing I have is just a discussion that we were talking about in the Discord room, and it was about pill bottle swarm trapping. If you like to catch swarms and you think it's fun, you think it's neat, there's several people in a Discord room that just absolutely love it, and I think it's the coolest thing. In fact, I got to go pick one up that's hanging out at my apiary on the tree. I just haven't pulled it in. It's in a swarm trap. It's not just like out in the open, but I got to go get that. Anyway, this pill bottle swarm trap technique is really, really cool. I guess there's probably a lot of different ways that you can do it. It really doesn't matter. As long as you get some kind of a line, whether it be like a fishing line or, 550 core, whatever you want to use. But you take an empty pill bottle and put some Swarm Commander or lemongrass oil or, whatever swarm bait you want to use. Put that into the bottle, hang it across a line of some sort, or even just off of a small branch of a tree, just something to kind of give it some clearance and some space. And then you probably want to put it, 5-6 feet off the ground so that it is in a accessible area. And there's these guys, look on YouTube, just do a search for pill bottle swarm trapping. But it's really, really cool. They just come right to the pill bottle. They swarm all around the pill bottle, and you can just drop them into a box, a nuke, a swarm trap, whatever, cardboard box, whatever you have around. Definitely worth checking out as a swarm trapping option and technique. We had a request to go into more details on cell builders. I think somebody asked for an episode on building cell builders. If you're not familiar with what a cell builder is, we're talking about building a hive box basically that is 100% intended to raise queen cells. I feel like this is something that I need to do with a recording. So it is still on my to-do list, but what I'm going to do, and it's probably not going to be until next spring. I don't need any cell builders the rest of the year, but what I'll do is in the spring, I'll do an actual video of me step by step building a cell builder. I'll walk through the grafting process, like beginning to end, the entire process of how I set up queen cell builders, how I graft, how I make the queen cells, how I store the queen cells. And we can probably even go ahead at that point and take them over to mating nukes, show you how I put them in the mini mating nukes, how I feed those, how I do that whole process. It's going to be like a multi-part series, and there's so much visual to it that I can talk you through it right now, and I will. I'll take a minute here and I'll run through it, but you really, really need to have that visual component. So we're going to kind of add that on the to-do list for, like late winter, spring to start prepping for that and getting that done next spring. The shorter abbreviated version of it is we know that it's really common for honeybees to make swarm cells in the spring. So what's going on in the spring? We have a big nectar flow. So you have a lot of the protein, you have the carbohydrates. So the protein or the pollen and the nectar are coming in. Everything in the hive is busy. There's a lot of activity. The population is growing at a very rapid rate so that they can go and gather more of these resources and bring them back. And because the resources are so abundant at that time, that is what makes it the best time to raise new queen bees. Now, switching over to the cell builder. When we set up a cell builder, we're not asking them to make a single queen cell or 2 or 3 or even 5 like you would see inside of a beehive that is preparing to possibly swarm. I'm asking them to do about 25 or 30 at a time. I have a frame that looks like a traditional wooden frame, but across the top piece of the wooden, the top bar, there's a bunch of little queen cells that are unformed queen cells, just the rounded cup basically. So there's queen cups that are all along that row. There's about 10 of them. Then there's a row that's down about 3 inches from that with another 10, and then another row 3 inches from that with another 10. So I take those cells with 30 cups in them. That's what I use to make my queens. So now going back to your traditional method by which the bees make queens, comparing it to this. The hive has a big population, lots of young bees, lots of nurse bees. Nurse bees are critical for raising brood. If you don't have new young bees, you can't raise new young bees, which kind of can get into some of these really challenging environments we have sometimes where queens die and you're trying to drop a egg and young larvae in. You're trying to get them to raise a new queen and they won't. You don't understand why. You got to have the young nurse bees to care for brood and to rear queens and all of that process. So when you're building a cell builder, and mine is typically 1 10 frame deep, when I'm building them, what I try to do is I try to mimic an environment that is very much like what the bees would see in the spring, that would make them want to swarm, make them want to draw up swarm cells. And I also make them queenless. So in that 10 frame Langstroth hive, that one single hive body, I'm going to load that up with 10 frames. And I'll kind of go through them like frame by frame. Frame number 1, let's just say that frames 1 and 10 are probably going to be, well, let me step back. Frame number 1 is probably going to be some kind of a honey or a nectar, something that just gives them a little bit of a backup food source in there in case frame number 10, which is probably a feeder, in case that runs out and they still need to feed. That would be kind of a backup thing for me. But in general with the cell builder, I don't really treat it like a nuke where it needs that honey, because typically on brood frames, there's usually a little bit of honey in the corners. There's some bee bread maybe on the opposite side of the frame or something like that. The most important things you have to have: bee bread, food source, nurse bees. Let's just say that frame 1 might be a pollen frame. And then 2, 4, I'm skipping 3, 2, 4, 5, 6, 8. Those are all brood frames. So I am going to a colony that is a productive colony or a nucleus colony that I'm using for resources. I'm pulling a frame of brood out with all those nurse bees. I'm looking for no eggs, no larvae, 100% capped brood with bees on it, because we know the bees on the brood are the nurse bees. Fill those frames up in all those positions. Frame position 3, that I'm going to leave blank for now, because that's where, when I graft all of my young larvae, that's where that frame is going to go. All the way on the opposite end in frame position 10, if you have a single frame feeder, or frame positions 9 and 10 for a 1.5 frame feeder, that is where I obviously put the feeder. In position 7, this is an optional one. What you can do with frame 7 is after 1 week, you can then bring in another group of grafted cells, drop them in slot 7. But if you don't need that many, then just keep another frame of brood. So now let's just assume that we're doing one single frame of grafted queens, grafted cells, or I should say grafted larvae. So you have frames 1, 2, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, all capped brood. Frame 3 section is open, nothing there. And then 9 and 10 are a space reserved for the feeder. Now the next step is you go find some other nukes or other colonies or wherever. Particularly, be ideal if you find one that maybe is about to swarm. That's even better. You go find some brood frames that are on those colonies. Again, no eggs, no larvae, all capped brood. Take those frames, bring them over, and go ahead and shake about 1, 2, 4. Whatever, put a whole bunch of nurse bees, shake them down into that colony. And then when you're done with that, close everything up. Now, it's up to you as to whether or not you want to completely close it up. I would actually go ahead and just, as long as the temperature is not too hot, and, you want to make sure they have ventilation in some way, but close them in. Like, do this around, 1, 2 o'clock in the afternoon or whatever. Close them in for the night. Don't even open it till the next morning. They've got food in there. They've got plenty of everything. But before you close them up, drop that frame with those 30 queen cups that you're going to end up grafting onto. Put those in there and let that stay in there for about 24 hours. So let's say you're doing this in the afternoon. You close them all up when you're done. And then maybe the next afternoon at like 4 or 5 o'clock, you just pop it open real quick and you're going to pull that frame out. Or you hold off even till the next day if you want, whenever your grafting day is, and take it out right before you graft. And that's not a bad idea either. So now you've got the cell builder set up. There's tons of bees in there already. They are bursting at the seams. There's nurse bees that are there. There are more nurse bees about to be born, and you're going to be trying to get them to make 25 queen cells. So now you take this frame that has the 30 cups on it, and you're going to go and you're going to graft the young larva. Now, I will do that in a completely separate discussion. That's got to have video as well. But you're going to graft all your larvae. Once that's done, you're going to bring that back. You're going to drop that into that frame position 3, close everything up, set a calendar reminder, come back in a week. You come back in a week, you check it out, you see what's going on. By the end of that week, they should be looking like they are about to close everything up. You could check them a little bit earlier. It wouldn't hurt, but you're going to know within a few days what the acceptance is. And then once you get, at first you'll probably get like a 40 to 60% success rate. As you get better with the grafting, you'll be at like 95, 98%. It just takes a little bit of practice getting the hang of getting the larva out on the little scooper or the Chinese grafting tool, whatever you use. It's a little bit of a thing you kind of got to get used to and a little bit of practice. But after that week, you check everything out. It's looking good. Put them back in for another week. I recommend around day 14 taking them out. And when I say day 14, I mean total life of the bees, day 14. So if you have an egg that the queen laid, like around day 3, that becomes a larva. You want to get that really young larva that is sitting in a pool of royal jelly. So basically, when you do the grafting, you're looking at larva that's probably already 3 or 4 days old. So from there, you're going to drop your frame into the cell builder. A week later, you come back, you're at day 11. You should have some capped queen cells, right? Now, at that point in time, you've got about 5 days. You got about 5 days before, because the queen is going to be egg to queen is 16 days. So by the time you get to that point, you're like, okay, I got about 5 days to get this figured out. Now, you do still have some more options here if you think that you won't be able to get to them in time. There's different types of kits for doing these grafts and how you connect them into queen cages and things like that. And a lot of these, you can actually slide a queen cage up and around the queen cell before it hatches and leave them inside there for like an extra day, week, whatever you have to do. All of the bees that are in there, all those workers and attendants and nurse bees, they will take care of all your queens while you're waiting, like while you're getting your act together or whatever. But what I recommend is once you get those to about day 14, so, again, doing the math between, egg to queen, around day 14, maybe day 15, you're going to want to get those into a mating nuke, a colony, a nuke, like whatever you want to do, but you want to get them into something so they can go ahead and just hatch in their colony. It's not the end of the world. If you have to do it a different way, you can, introduce her via another method if you want to do that. But I just always prefer to have the queen cell. I think that you have a colony that's queenless. Queen cell is there, particularly those mini mating nukes. Those are really easy to work with. But again, once those queen cells are capped, there's nothing that precludes you from taking those out earlier. I just recommend that if you do, they are definitely temperature sensitive. So like I have a little incubator that I can set the temperature to, and I can plug it in and I can ride around with it and it stays at the right temperature. As long as you've got an incubator, you can do that fine. Otherwise, they really need to be somewhere with bees that can kind of help regulate the temperature for them. So that's a really high level but semi-detailed overview of the cell builder. But like I said, we'll dive into that a little bit deeper later on. Okay, the next thing I have is someone asked me to talk about requeening with a mated laying queen. Like, what are the rules for this? And it kind of goes to a lot of what I tell you guys all the time. There's a lot of different ways you can do things. I don't know if there's necessarily a right or a wrong way, but what I would say is If you have a mated and also laying queen, and again, this is one of those subjects you're probably really tired of hearing me talk about, but a queen that is in a colony laying eggs that morning, and you take her out of, let's say, a nuke and put her into a large colony or a regular colony that just happens to be queenless, you should have no issues directly introducing her and having her go in. Her pheromone is strong. She's a laying queen, and there should not be an issue with that. Now, where it could present an issue is if you have a colony that has recently become queenless and they still think their queen is there, that can be an issue. My recommendation, again, we're talking about mated and laying queens. So this is a queen that was either in a pushing cage or came directly out of a colony, or you're taking her from a mating nuke, whatever it might be. But a queen that has laid eggs within the last few hours. One way that's really a safe way of doing things, you're never going to be unsafe if you say, look, I'm going to stick her in the cage, put her in the colony, let them release her in a couple of days. You can always do that. It's with a mated queen, it's really not necessary. You just want the colony to be queenless. Make them queenless for 24, 48 hours, then bring her in. That makes it a lot easier. Now, again, I have myself requeened one laying queen. Like, I've killed a laying queen and took a new laying queen and put her in there, and they didn't bat an eye. Different colonies handle things differently. A safe thing that you can always do is put her in a queen cage and set her on the top frames. Like, just open up the outer and inner cover and get down, if there's 3 or 4 supers on or whatever, get down a little bit into it, but just get to where you can see a decent number of bees and set her down on there and see how they act. If they come up and they look really excited and they're trying to get to her and but like it's in a like happy, you can just tell the actions of the bees, like they're excited. That's a really good sign. If you see them kind of like agitated and they're bending their abdomen in, like they're trying to extend their stinger around to try to find a way to poke her through the cage, pretty good indicator that they're not really happy with her. But that's always a safe way to start. And you could also even take a honeybee, a single bee, and bring it into the queen cage with her. Like, after you've kind of validated it looks like everything's okay, you could open and put one in there with her and just see how she behaves with it. And if she gets into more of like that grooming kind of behavior, you're pretty sure that they're happy and she's going to be accepted. This is one where it just gets really weird, because I've done some things because I had at a point in time, not today, but at a point in time, I had a surplus where I could just go over to a small nuke and grab an extra queen. Like, if something didn't work out and it didn't go well, it's like, oh, wow, that didn't work. Note to self, let me go grab this other queen over here. And that's not super easy when you have 2 hives, 3 hives, 1 hive, and there's a problem with your queen. So again, you can cage them, you can direct release in almost any colony, but just err on the side of caution. If you have a question, you're going through this and you're like, I'm not really sure what my circumstance is based on like where I am and what you heard here, shoot me a message or whatever, but you should be okay with that guidance. The next thing I have on the list is the newspaper method of joining colonies of bees. This is one of those things that just really wears me out. A long time ago, and I don't even remember who it was. I almost want to say it was Michael Palmer, but I really don't remember. I think it might have been Michael Palmer, but I was watching somebody join a couple colonies together, and I thought, well, I was always told about this newspaper thing, and I saw it happen, in video, and I'm like, well, that didn't seem to be an issue. And then I watched people make nukes and package bees and doing all these things that had lots of different bees coming from lots of sources, and they were all being mixed and mingled, and it wasn't an issue. So then I did it myself. I tried different things. And what I have never, like literally never in the course of my beekeeping career, have I ever joined 2 colonies using newspaper. Maybe my bees are a freak of nature or whatever, but the only scenario that I can think of where I would be concerned about this or cautious about this is if I had a really small colony with a queen, and then I had, for whatever reason, this really, really large colony that was queenless. Like, maybe in that scenario, you could have some concern, like, oh no, what if this larger colony thinks they've got to take over? And I guess maybe, but I've never done it. I basically, like, I guess if I were in that situation, let's say I had a colony that was like 2 times the size of the colony that had a queen, I would probably just go ahead and maybe increment them in, like maybe just bring, like 1 one deep, with 4 or 5 frames in on one day, and then maybe bring a few more in the next day, and then the last deep on the last day or something like that. Maybe spread it out over a day or two. But even that, like I smoke, like you puff some smoke, it kind of blocks the pheromones, it blocks the warnings, it blocks anything that tells them you should be attacking or angry. And then when the dust settles and the smoke settles and all of that, they just go and do their thing. Like I said, I'm not trying to poo on anybody's cornflakes or anything here, but like I've literally never done this. And like I searched for it trying to find somebody who had some kind of like scientific information. Like, oh, no, this is why you can't do this. There's like 4.6 million videos on how to join hives using the newspaper method. So I'm adding that one to my to-do list. I'm going to show you like me joining like 8 hives of varying sizes without using any paper, and everything is going to be okay. So I'm a little bit irritated with the newspaper method. Okay. Let's see. Okay. The next question is moving bees around after catching a swarm, or in general. So I think there's an old rule. It's something like 5 inches or 5 miles, something like that when you're talking about moving bees. So let's say that, you go into your backyard, and we'll just say that your backyard is rectangular, right? That it's a long backyard that's not as wide. On one side or another, you've got a beehive up against a fence, but you want it to be from the middle of the fence, say all the way to the back of your yard. Basically what you're going to want to do, and I've done this before and it works, is you pick up the hive and you move it about 4 or 5 inches down a little bit. And then about 3 or 4 days later, you move it about another 5 or 6 inches, 4 or 5 inches, whatever, and let them get accustomed to things. Let them find where everything is and get it all figured out. And then once you see everybody using the entrances regularly and everything looks fine, go ahead and move them again. That's option 1, the preferred way of doing things. Option 2, pick them up and just move them wherever you want. And you're going to lose some foragers. So this is going to require the colony to have to use some resources up to make some replacement bees at a time of year when you may or may not be able to afford to give up or lose those bees. That is going to be an individual decision based on the time of year and when you're doing this and why you're doing this. But I would say if you had to make a move like that, do it at a time of year, like in the spring where they're really ramping up anyway. And what's a couple hundred bees, right? If you lose 400 or 500 bees, that's not a big deal at all. It's a half day's worth of work for the queen. I mean, I've told this story several times. When I moved to this house, it was like a third of a mile or a quarter of a mile down the road. I moved them. They were coming with me, and I drove by and looked over the fence, and there's there were 2 colonies over there at that house, and there's 2 big clusters of bees on the fence right above where those colonies used to be, and that's just the way it is. Now, with a swarm, you're kind of in the same boat, right? You have like a mix of bees that have left and have swarmed, and they're now settling into this swarm trap that you've caught. Or even if it's just like they're on a branch and you're just like, okay, I'm going to just put them down on the ground right below this branch. I've done that before. And then they're there, and some of the bees came down off the branch and they settled down into the hive and everything is looking good. And then you're like, all right, well, I want to move them like 100 feet over there. It's the exact same thing as the scenario that I just gave a minute ago. You can incrementally move them and let them gradually get used to the move, or you just pick them up, move them, send them out, and that's that. Now, a cool thing you could do is if you had another colony, like maybe you had a mating nuke or something else that you had that already had some nurse bees in it, or it already had what it needed in it, but maybe it wouldn't be bad if there were a couple extra foragers working for them. You could throw a nuke in that spot and let them continue foraging for the nuke until they died and then move it around. But now you're again in the same boat. You still have bees sitting in that spot. What it really comes down to for me is I'm going to do what's best for me in a given situation. Most of the time, I'm just going to pick them up and I'm just going to move them, and that's going to be the end of it. Some of the bees will hang on the tree for a while, rain or shine, until they die, like hive or die kind of thing. Some of them are just going to drift over and go find another colony somewhere. But yeah, they'll figure it out. Oh, and I think the last comment on that is, generally it's accepted that about 5 miles is the max range that a bee will roam in its foraging efforts. So, if you have a friend, that's another thing that you could do as well. let's say that you're in your backyard, same example from before, halfway down your fence line is where you have a hive. You pick that up, take it 5, 10, 20 miles away to your friend's place. Your foragers are probably going to live about 3 weeks, something like that, as in a forager status for those who actually make it till the full life, to live a good full life out as a forager. You could take it out there for 3-4 weeks, and then package it back up. Just close the entrance at night or whatever, and bring it back home, and then they'll reorient when they get back to your new home, and you'll have all your bees. But inevitably, there's a few of them that just didn't make it home the night before. They were out at the club, whatever else they do at Bee Club, but they were out and about, didn't make it home, and they'll return the next day. So you're still going to have a few of them left behind, but it happens. So folks, I really, really had planned to get this knocked out. I thought this was going to be like a 15, 20 minute thing. I don't even know if I'm halfway through the list here. So I'm going to go ahead and break off right now, and I'm going to have to pick the rest of this up on a subsequent episode. But what I will do is I will get that released ahead of schedule. I'll get it released earlier. I won't wait a full week or whatever. I want to get this out quickly, but I've still got like at least 10 more questions and probably another half hour, 40 minutes of talking to do. And I don't want to make it this big, massive episode. But I do have one note that I want to say is I want to give a special thanks to everybody in the Discord room who really makes it what it is. The people are often thanking me. They're like, hey, thank you for making this community and all this kind of stuff, and making this place where everybody can exchange ideas. But it's all of you. It is all of you who go there regularly, who are asking questions, who are answering questions, who are talking to each other, joking around, having fun, sharing your experiences. Like, you all are what make it. So thank you. Thank you for your contributions there. Thank you for being there. Thank you for sharing your thoughts and ideas. Thank you for challenging me, challenging each other, and just thanks for having fun. All right, everybody, I'm going to wrap this up. I'm going to get on and get the next one recorded. I'll get this one released today. It'll probably be a few days on the second one, but we've still got like 3 or 4 more going. I've got my interview with Charlotte Wiggins. We got her coming back. That's going to be released here shortly. We've got another interview with a gentleman out in Utah. We've got so much going on. All right, everybody. I hope you all take care of yourselves. Be kind to one another. And I love you. There's nothing you can do about it. We'll talk to you soon.